Welcome back, book nerds. This is Library Card, the show for people who want to think deeply about the books they read and get inspired to read more. I'm Megan Gliona. I'm here with Brian Brinkman and RJB, and today we're going to be talking about a book from an author that meant a lot to RJ when he was younger, and I think it's going to spark a great conversation about books that impact us when we're young and what it's like to revisit them as an adult. We're talking about the Tom Robbins novel, Fierce Invalids, Home from Hot Climates. But before we do that, Brian and RJ, how are you guys doing today?
Fantastic. I think.
It's really.
I think.
I do now. Yeah.
You sound really fantastic.
Yeah. No, we're doing well. We're doing
That was
well.
very
It's almost
convincing.
the holidays. Yeah.
How about
It
you,
is
RJ?
almost
How
the
are you?
holidays. I'm fine. I'm tired. We're just gonna, we're gonna make it. We're gonna make it through.
Your love of sports and your love of podcasting coming together today. You're pushing through. I appreciate it.
I'm just trying, really.
Do you want to know something that's really wild, you guys? We started this podcast a year ago.
Oh, wow.
Like a year ago this week.
Wow.
Yeah. And we did 28 episodes throughout the past year.
Should be proud of ourselves.
We should. And I was just thinking, reflecting kind of on how it's changed me as a reader. Do you guys have any reflections or thoughts about how it's changed how you read, besides being forced to read books you might not want to read?
I think it's forced me to take I used to be very much of like, if I don't connect with a character or a story, I don't really want to read it. And that's a very limited way of approaching literature. I don't want to encourage anyone to think like that, but that's where I was. And a lot of what we've done here from a collaborative standpoint, trying to see each other's perspectives, collectively bringing books to the show, but also individually, it has put me in a position where I have looked at a book from outside of like, do I enjoy this? Am I getting something out of this? Who is this for? And what is this for? And I think with anything, with music, with film, even in the way that you can watch sports, I'll throw that in there, like understanding from someone else's perspective, even if it's not how you see, is just a really valuable experience.
Yeah, I think like thinking about reading from a slightly different perspective, just because we have, different perspectives in the way that we think about these things. So I think, kind of the similar thing to what Brian was saying. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel the same. I think I used to read books and I would just kind of move on after them, think about them while I was reading them a little bit and then kind of what's next. And I feel like I've been in a literature course in a way. Like, I feel like we've been able to kind of read books, mine them, think about them deeply, hear your perspectives. And I've loved thinking more analytically when I've been reading, and also just thinking more thematically and kind of pushing myself to think deeper about what I read, which I've really loved. And I also really loved our talks about movies. It's really changed how I watch movies. And I've learned so much about movies from our talks and also just from watching so many more. And the conversations that we've been having about movies and books and how those two art forms differ have been really enlightening and really fun for me.
Yeah, we also launched a podcast within a podcast that we launched, which is an exciting endeavor. I feel like we're breaking media ground by doing that. No, yeah, I think that a lot of people have book clubs. We have a book podcast that, it fills that same void where we're all kind of in continuous communication while also in communication about the music that we're listening to and able to, I think, learn about each other, but also then you learn about yourself based on how you take something versus how someone else does. Like, that's always a really interesting point to me with any sort of art. Isn't so much of like, you have the right perspective or I have the right perspective, but more, why do we see things differently and how does that reveal itself in that way?
Yeah, and also being forced to read things that you wouldn't necessarily read, I think is really great. I tend to read in a really narrow lane when I'm picking for myself. So it's been really fun to be kind of like pushed outside of that comfort zone and see what you pull from other things that you might not have picked up. So that's been really fun.
Yeah.
Pushed into
totally agree.
Chinese filmography as well, even if you don't want to, a lot of things happen to people.
I think so sour about that. We liked it more than you think, I think.
Okay. I think I think also we broke ground last month with an episode where we looked at a book and a movie at the same time, and that experience of not only what are you seeing in this book or what are you seeing in this movie, but what are you seeing when those two things are combined and some elements are taken out, some elements are added in. How does that impact you? That conversation's been really fascinating for me to think about.
Yeah, we're going to do some more of that next year too, it looks like too, which is exciting. I'm excited about that. What are you guys reading right now? RJ, what are you reading right now?
Right now I'm reading a book called Buckeye by Patrick Ryan. It's like it's been getting a lot of buzz. It happens to be about a small town, a fictional small town that's cool. So there's a lot of like references in there. It's an interesting book that takes place between like World War II and the Vietnam War, but it's like a mid-century kind of book about America and about, a few main characters. It's interesting. I don't know what my ultimate like feeling about it is yet because I'm like almost three-quarters of the way through, but it's the writing is great and the story is good. It's very much like it's a very like leisurely paced book, which I think is
Hmm.
good, but I think it also like it's it reads like maybe the pace of the times. That's what my wife said, which I think is
Mm,
interesting. Like
Oh, I
sort
like
of
that.
feels like feels like the times, like things were just like a little slower and,
Slower.
simpler. But the writing's really good.
So it's kind of a small town book about a small
Yeah.
town.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I'm a sucker for like a small town Americana book,
mhm.
especially in the Midwest.
Yeah. This
Give
has
it to
got
me.
it. This has got all
Yeah.
of it.
Okay. We'll have to add that to the list. Brian, what are you reading?
Well, I'm doing my normal 3-book rotation thing.
Of course. Wouldn't expect
My
anything less.
my novel, which is sitting next to me, is a beast of a novel to conclude. Well, who knows? I hope that I finish this before the end of the year. I'm probably only a quarter of the way through, but it's called the Deluge by Stephen Markley, who wrote a book I read back in 2023 called Ohio that I probably mentioned to you guys, half dozen times, if not more. Loved that book. That book looked at 4 friends from a small town in Ohio who had gone off in different directions following graduation in 2003, and they crossed paths 10 years later, and so much had changed in the Rust Belt due to the Iraq War, the financial crisis, political upheaval. And it was a really fascinating look at kind of the millennial generation as it comes into its own in the late 2000s and early 2010s. And I related a ton to it. This one is about big picture climate change and what is going to happen with climate change. It spins out an alternative projection of American history over the next 20 or 30 years. It kind of feels like a novel version of the movie Traffic, if you guys remember that, where you have like 6 different characters within the drug war. And so you pop in and out of each of these characters. They don't seem to have anything related to each other, but then they start to coalesce around a big event. This is starting to have that feel as we move through it. I'm digging it. And then quickly, I'm also reading a really, really prescient book called When the Clock Broke by John Gans, which looks at the rise of right-wing extremism in the late 80s and early 90s and parallels specifically around David Duke and Pat Buchanan to Donald Trump and the MAGA movement today. And then I'm listening to The Age of Eisenhower. It's another presidential biography here, America and the World in the 1950s. I'm just totally engrossed. That pace that RJ is talking about, the suits that men used to wear, the
Yes.
backroom smoke-filled deals that still went on, the realignment as we move out of World War II into the Cold War. Just a sucker for it, man.
Love that. Ohio's on my list. I'm going to read it next year.
I think you'll enjoy.
Okay.
What do you got?
I am reading a love story, of course. Tracks for me. It's called The Loneliness of Sonia and Sunny by Kieran Desai. She wrote Inheritance of Loss, which won the Booker in 2006. I never read it. Did either of you guys read it? No?
Nope.
Okay. This novel is also shortlisted for the Booker this year. And it's the story of 2 people, Sonia and Sunny, who are in America after college. Their parents are both from India. and their families in India are trying to set them up to be married. And the book takes place in America and in India, and is kind of the clash between tradition and modernity. And I'm only 150 pages in, and I feel like I'm in sort of a prologue. It hasn't really grabbed me yet. Sonia and Sunny haven't even met yet. So we'll see. There's a lot to come, but I'm excited about it. People loved this book, so it's gotten a lot of good press. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I have that on the Kindle. It's one of my next 3 books after I finish this book. I have 3 books on the Kindle, and that's one of them.
It was so funny because I bought this book and my bookseller's like, this is probably going to win the Booker. And then I went home that night and immediately saw that Flesh won the Booker. And I was like, okay, he's wrong, but it's okay. I'm going to read it.
Yeah, a lot of
I'm
people
gonna
are
like it
talking about it,
anyway. Yeah, it's supposed to be very good. So
He's in the book selling game, not the prediction game.
exactly. I love Nick at McNally Jackson. He's the best. Well, let's get into a book that doesn't have a prologue for sure, just drops us right into its wild universe. We're talking about Fierce Invalids, Home from Hot Climates. It's Tom Robbins' 7th novel, and it was published in 2000. The novel follows Switters, a contradictory CIA agent with a love of show tunes, as he traipses across the world chasing an answer to a mystical curse, courting women, both young and old, and releasing a parrot in the South American jungle. But this book to me is not defined by its plot, but more by its existential commentary on life. It's a wild ride. And RJ, I want you to start us off and just tell us what Robbins meant to you when you were young and why you wanted to bring this book to us.
Well, I think like a few things. One is that I think that I don't know why I didn't tell you guys to read Skinny Legs and All, which is maybe a better book. This is I mean, I think like on Goodreads, like all of his books are highly rated, which I think is part of the whole thing that we'll talk about because whatever. But this book was the first Tom Robbins book that I read, probably in like 2000 or so. I was probably like 21 or something. I mean, I think that the main thing is that like none of his books are really about whatever the book is about. It's just he is
Yeah.
like he's a vibes guy, And I think ultimately like that is the point of any of his books. Like he's a master. He was a master of language and metaphor and just I mean he's just so good at so many things that I think a lot of writers it's just very unconventional and interesting the way that he uses language, the way that he uses everything. So I think that's part of it. And I think right after he passed away, we started talking about this, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's
Yeah.
the impetus for this.
Yeah. I mean, I think like the provocative nature of everything that he writes about and says is something that is really appealing. I think that he is like a writer for young people. I think that there's others who fall into that category, but to me, he's like the prototype of like, if you're like 20, like this is the kind of book that's going to like blow your mind because he does things with language. Like if we all read a lot in high school and college and, then you like start reading on your own and you're like, oh shit, this is like a totally different way of thinking about writing, So I guess that's my first, take.
Yeah, it's funny. When I was thinking about this book, I'm kind of jumping ahead to the end, but when I was thinking about this book, I was thinking a lot about how much I loved the Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged when I was this age, and how much they just absolutely floored me, because I think that there are certain authors that bring worldviews to you that when you're young are so impactful. And as you get older, you can kind of think about unravel them in a different way, but that really just shock you and teach you so much about life. And I could see Robbins doing that to someone when they're 19, 20 years old, because the way he talks about religion, for example, or the way he talks about philosophy and the meaning of life is just, it's so playful and so inventive and so creative. And I can see it being really impactful when I was that age as well.
Yeah, reading this and thinking about kind of what we're talking about right now, there's like a clear path for me if you are 20, 21 years old, where you go from Kurt Vonnegut's Sirens of Titans to Robbins to David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest. And like there's a very there's a very like young dude, slightly intellectual, but also like knows how to throw back some bush lights and have a really good time. Which I feel like describes
Is
RJ
that you,
20 years old,
RJ?
like pretty smart, like knows his shit, can hang with a bunch of different groups of people, but is also gonna like go and get, he's gonna go and get faded at the fish show as well. There's
Yeah,
gonna be
likes
that
fish.
balance there, and like um those three authors to me are like varying steps in that type of awakening. That I did not have I had the experience with the first and third one that I listed. I did not have the experience with Robbins when I was younger. And I kind of wish I had, because reading this book kind of it brought a lot to light about how I looked at the world at that age in ways that I liked and also didn't like. You know what I mean? Which I think we'll get into, like the parts that didn't totally connect with me with this book at this point in my life. But I feel like if I had read this like summer 2005, it would have absolutely blown my mind in that sort of way. And part of that is like when I think about Vonnegut or I think about David Foster Wallace, I had those experiences at that age. And when I go back to them, it is this like conversation with my younger self. And so I wonder,
Mm,
just kind of off the bat, if I wasn't having that conversation in my own head as I was reading this, because I didn't have that sort of Robbins experience that you clearly had as a younger person. But I don't know. I don't know your thoughts on that, RJ.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the way that he writes about in any, I mean, I now that we're talking about it, I mean, I wonder if it was like I mean, I don't know that he was really like thinking about marketing his books, but if he was and he was like doing this, he was writing in a way to like connect with the kind of people that you're describing. It's very smart and it really like works, you know. I mean, I think
Isn't
it's
it?
similar to Vonnegut for sure. There's probably others in that kind of category, but just the way he talks about anything from like religion to relationships to like just like your relationship with the world as a human, where like in your early 20s it's like everything is just like extremely profound, you know. Like when
exactly.
someone kind of describes it to you in that way, it's very much like not just validating but also gives you more vocabulary and different ways of thinking about things that you're probably already thinking about at that like time in your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think did you ever read Confederacy of Dunces, either of you?
I
Mm-mm.
didn't.
That book's amazing, and it's very much in this vein. It's a picaresque novel, which is like, a novel about a rascal or a kind of a scoundrel, and that's kind of what this is too, and it's one of my favorite books. I read it twice in a row when I was around that age, and it's it won the Pulitzer, posthumously. The author died, and it was released like 10 years later with like his mom
Wow.
and a bunch of people. The book is incredible. It's just so sad that he passed away because he had so much talent. And the book is very similar in that it follows someone who is this larger than life personality. And I think that there's something so bold and beautiful about these kind of books about especially men that are interesting, especially when you're young and you're trying to figure out how you want to live. And I think the contradictions that Robbins plays with in this book is are so incredible, the way that he plays with this idea of like good and evil and innocence and experience, and how humans are just so contradictory. And by painting Switters the way he does with these massive contradictions, it allows you, I think, at a time when you are like 19, 20, and you're trying to figure out who you are, to realize that you don't have to be black and white. I think that you kind of are trying to figure out, like, am I this person or am I that person, right? Do I like this or do I like this? Do I need this or this? And I think that he's trying to kind of say, like, you're going to want opposing things, and that's humanity. And I think that is, he does that in such a creative, playful way in this book. And O'Toole does that too. And I think that it really reminded me of that book and made me want to reread that book again.
Yeah, that one's been on our bookshelf for decades, but I've never read it.
Oh, I would love to read it now again because I haven't read it in like 20 years, but I loved that book. I mean, I loved it. It was my favorite book for years and years.
Nice.
It'd be a fun one to read. Maybe we should read it for the podcast and see how it hits now.
I'm down for that.
So, RJ, did you feel differently reading it at this age than you did when you were younger? Like, did
Um,
you think about kind of what Brian's saying? Were you in, like, a conversation with yourself about that at all?
yeah, I mean, I think the main thing is just that it like the writing itself is still just like a very it's so unconventional and it's so different than almost anything that I read now that that still is like it's just I mean, plots for Robins are like almost non-existent. I mean, there is a plot, but it just doesn't really matter. Like it,
It's
so
wild, yeah.
yeah. Like I think for all of the books that I've read of his, they're all kind of like there is a plot, but it's almost just like because there has to be one. You know, not it's not what drives the book at all. So
Right.
I think the writing is still like just so different and yeah. So I still think it's like really amazing what he's able to do with writing. You know, maybe more so
Yeah.
now. The
I mean, the
fact that he was
language,
able to
yeah,
do it so many times, you know?
it's so creative and so playful, and
Yeah.
he's kind of just, like, getting his characters in places to have conversations, and he's trying to get them to have them with very different people, right? And so
Yeah.
I think that that's one thing that he does so well, and creates these scenarios where people who are very different and in very weird circumstances have to have these really deep conversations about life.
Yeah.
That was one of my favorite things about the book is the language, like, he has really lush metaphors and loose language. I read a little bit about how he writes, and he would write a sentence and then rewrite it 10, 15, 20 times until it was perfect. And that just shows kind of the craft that he's playing with. And I always felt like he's kind of like Vonnegut and Gabriel Garcia Marquez, like if they had a baby, because Marquez is like that magic realism where like anything can happen and really bizarre things happen, like curses and plagues and things falling from the sky. And that's how Robbins is too. But he's also got that Vonnegut edge to him where Marquez is romantic and more kind of classical. And it's just so fun to see those things kind of mashed up together. And he had a quote that I wanted to read that about why he is the way he is. And he said, I'm descended from a long line of preachers and policemen. Now it's common knowledge that cops are congenital liars, and evangelists spend their whole life telling fantastic tales in a way as to convince otherwise rational people that they're factual. So I guess I come by my narrative inclinations naturally. And I just thought that was so
Yeah.
great. Talks about like explains kind of who he is, I feel like, and why he
Yeah.
writes the way he does. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
I
feel
don't know.
like,
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
well, I was just gonna like what you're talking about, like the lack of plot, the conversations that they fall into here. Like, I think that one thing that connects all through lines of this story is, and told in the kind of tone that he is writing to you with, is just how strange our nation's intelligence personnel are. And this does such a great job of like dropping into these kind of subversive episodes that CIA found itself in throughout the Cold War, and then especially now in like the post Cold War era in the 90s, when we're kind of in this weird in between, a lot of shifting norms and ideas from a geopolitical standpoint. It gives you a really great opportunity to dive into just one random person who's a part of all of this, who's a part of this entire intelligence apparatus, but who, like, what that line of work does to a person from a sanity standpoint, from a well-being standpoint, from just like a normal rhythm of life standpoint. And so you have this like kind of shift in perspective on society and on just existing on a 9 to 5 basis. That type of perspective is so different from kind of your standard character in the suburbs with a family, trying to just like make ends meet. And this is what happens to their life. Here is someone who's living kind of on the fringes of that and doesn't really adhere to that overall structure. So the lack of deliberate plot really fits the type of character that he's writing about here. Um, because that person is obviously not going to look at things in as much of a linear pathway as the three of us are, getting up kind of similar times each day, having to be presentable in this sort of manner so that you can just like carry on the life that you live. You have these moments where kind of life explodes in front of your eyes and like shows you, what is possible to feel and experience. But in a character like this, that kind of is his entire life. That chase for something else, something different. There's a interesting form of uh, um, like resistance within this that was very subversive at that time in the 90s that really shows itself within this book and shows you that like there are just people living a completely different calendar and rhythm of life to the way that we are, that I found really fascinating diving into this.
I think one of my favorite parts of the book is when he's in the nunnery in the
Yeah.
Middle East. I think that was my favorite part of the book, and just the setting is so unique, and placing him in this place where he's having these conversations with Domino, the nun that he kind of falls in love with, and when he's talking about religion and the meaning of life, they have unbelievable conversations, and they also have some really interesting conversations about when he starts to talk to Maestra later, his grandmother, about depression and self-esteem. And I was thinking about so much of this book to me really does feel rooted in the 90s and the kind of things, the way that people thought about things. And like he talks a lot about depression, about how it's kind of like your choice and you should just get over it. And there's a lot of this kind of like, I don't know, there's this self-reliance that was very different than how we view things now, and I think there's a lot of the a lot of the stuff about his feelings and his relationship with his stepsister, are so 90s and is so kind of something that was hard for me to kind of like move through with the book. I think I'm not into cancel culture. I think it's a huge part of why we are where we are in this country right now. But I did feel like it was challenging to read those sections of the book because I grew up in the 80s and 90s and I understand the over sexualization of women and girls. And having young teenage girls at home, it was like 2000. It just would have
Mhm.
hit so different. And I think it's meant to be seen as ridiculous and funny. But I think he makes some choices that kind of like, because Switter's friends also doubles down on that and like has the same feelings and the same kind of proclivities, that it ends up kind of adding validity to it. And I think that there's it's hard to read some of these texts from that time period now after, we've been through Me Too and like, Weinstein and Epstein, and it just becomes hard to kind of see this in the way that it was meant, I think. And so that definitely pulled me out of the book in a way that was um, sad for me at times, because I feel like that was something that was really, the book is so fun and playful, and I don't think he intended it to be any other way. I don't
Yeah.
know how that hit you guys. I don't know if it hits you different now, or if that's something that's just from like a feminine perspective, it's just harder to read. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think like all of his books have his whole thing is contradiction, right? And I think like all of his books have characters that have like I think it's hard as a writer to like write about to try to develop characters that are both likable and realistic, but like to have a character who has like really kind of like despicable behavior, is like a really hard thing to do because you're still I think like to for readers, you can't really you know what you're not going to enjoy reading a book about only characters that you hate, right? I mean, you
Right.
could, but it's just a different kind of experience. And I think all of
I
his
don't know, man. A lot
characters
of people love the show Succession.
yeah, that's true.
It's so
That's
true.
true. That's true. And I
And
guess
yeah.
I mean, I think Long Island Compromise had some of that too.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
For
Yes.
sure. But I think he like always gives these characters something that's like realistically like really bad, not just like they have like a flaw that they're trying to get over, but like, I mean, the idea of like this guy being an intelligence officer and all the drugs and all the other stuff, it's just like he's trying to like push the envelope, I think, with like, can
Yeah.
you
Mm.
can you like hate this person or can you make it can you like get around it to see that the good parts of him or whatever, I don't
'Cause I
know
feel
about
like
the
he
other
is
part.
likable. Like, I think he is likable. Like, I liked him as a character. I
Yeah.
couldn't tell if that was like an attempt to push that. Like, I think because this whole concept that he's obsessed with innocence, right?
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
part of his like main drive as a character, is he wants to like understand innocence, pursue innocence, um, capture innocence, like own innocence. But then, so I don't know, I couldn't like, to me it's like it felt different than an author writing like a character with a bad trait. But I also
Yeah.
feel like it might just be that was a moment in time when those things were seen as not as despicable as maybe we know they to be now.
Yeah. I mean,
I mean, I
honestly,
just think
I
really
had like forgotten about that part of it, that very specific part of it over the past 20 years. So I guess maybe
yeah, it
it
probably
would,
didn't even impact you then.
yeah, not much, but I understand what you're saying for sure. I don't know.
Yeah.
Brian, what do you
What
think?
yeah.
I mean, it's really hard to pull myself out of reading this book in 2025 versus 2000. I don't think that we had like I think part of the reason he included a underage love interest in this book is because it's provocative. I think
Yeah.
Yeah.
you could almost like say there's like no deeper meaning, that he's literally just trying to like push against like the norms of society. And I think you're absolutely right. Like that is something that in 2000 was probably kind of laughed at or
Yeah.
scoffed at a little bit more than like the way it emerged over the last 10 years, where it was like, I think on a societal level, we're like just treating women in general wrong, like not just like you should, like there are shifting norms which change the way we read books. So like, yeah, when I read it and as I was reading it, I was kind of just like, could we just like make her 19? Like, is that really a problem here? But
I
like,
know.
it's not on me to like, update this. It definitely made it harder. Well, and this kind of gets back to something I was saying at the top. Like, it made it harder for me to relate to any part of this book, and like I was really excited going in. I love RJ's recommendations. I've always wanted a reason to read Tom Robbins. I'm a super sucker for like CIA stuff. I love like the idea of what happened in the Arab world before and in the Islamic world before 9/11. Like in that like decade before, there's a ton of really fascinating, dark, wild stuff that led to 9/11. And so I was like totally ready to dive in. And then like I had a hard time just simply getting into the story and reading it because the way he writes is so different from what I'm used to. And then there was this element of it. Um, I guess like the way I would chalk up a lot of this book to me reads like a relic from the 1990s,
Hmm.
which
Mhm. Yeah.
it feels very Gen X. It has this like kind of arrogance, but also like sarcasm towards all aspects of the world that I think coming out in the late 1990s and appealing to people who were in their high teenage to like mid 20s period during that point in time, like that is a perspective that very much shifted. Like when I turned 20 years old, there was a very different way of looking at the world, I think, than if you were 20 years old in 1999 or 2000. Something about the first few years of the 2000s changed those generations pretty dramatically, and I feel like a big generation gap with people who are just like 5-10 years older than me sometimes, because like analog versus digital culture, what was kind of allowed for people versus like what was protected after 9/11, from an entertainment standpoint, from an experience standpoint. So anyway, I'm kind of rambling all over the place, but like i I found that aspect to just be kind of what you were saying, Meg, that like we had a little bit more of a lackadaisical view of this sort of stuff back then, in a way that now I just don't think that you're getting published. Like if that's a character you're including, I don't think you're getting published
Yeah.
at this point.
Yeah, definitely not.
Or
Definitely not.
like the book becomes about that, right? Like then you're writing Lolita, and
Yeah.
so like
The whole
it's
controversy around it when it's
right.
released, like every aspect of the book becomes about that. It is kind of
Yeah.
a weird um I don't know. There's a interesting aspect that like you could write about this in a sarcastic manner in 1998 and get away with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm not surprised that it didn't stick with you, RJ, because I bet if I read this in 2000, it wouldn't have stuck with me either. And
Yeah.
I think it kind of is in the same way that when I read Ayn Rand's books and I read about this like extreme capitalism and this idea that like ambition and ego could move society forward, and it was so inspiring to me as someone who was ambitious and who did have big ideas and who thought that this idea that like people could move society forward and was completely unaware of how much that book leaves out about systematic oppression and reality. And I didn't understand the philosophy fully because I had so little life experience. And I think that that's what's kind of magical about reading books when you're that age, is that you really pull from them where you are. And I think that's kind of what
And
he
where you
does.
want to go
And where
and
you
what you
want to
want to
go,
do.
right?
Yeah.
You're like seeing kind of what you want in books. And I haven't reread The Fountainhead or Atlas Shrugged, but I would be so curious to see what they would read like to me now. But
Yeah.
it really reminded me. I don't know if there are other books that you both read when you were younger that impacted you greatly, that you question now or you think about now how differently it would read.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder about Vonnegut. I haven't read Vonnegut in a long time, but I don't know if I would find. I feel like some of this stuff, like even Tom Robbins, I probably would find like slightly more cheesy now than I did then.
Yeah.
There's probably other books or authors like that that would just like feel less profound now than they did then.
Yeah, I mean, I'm struggling to think of a book aspect of this, but like Vonnegut I've reread a few times in recent years. Like The Sirens of Titan is still an all-time favorite book of mine. I There is something that as you get older and a little bit more like rationally based, the whimsical nature and kind of the way that it plays around with science and science fiction doesn't come across as like brilliant as it did when I was like 22,
Hmm.
23 years old, but it's still enjoyable. It's just it feels like there are gaps that he's leaving out. Whereas like on the other side, like
Hmm.
I compare this to David Foster Wallace, like I still get chills when I think of like what he was able to do in a book like Infinite Jest, and what the ultimate conclusion of that book was. Really blew me away when I read it. But I read it when I was like 25, 26 years old. And a lot of those things that made it so impactful were kind of what you're describing there, Meg. Like it was the first time I was thinking about these things, or it was the first time I was encountering them in my real life, or trying to understand what does entertainment really mean for me? What is what does parental love mean to you, and how does that shape you as a person? And when those sorts of things are like combined in this 1,000-page book, like it feels like, oh my God, this is like I've unlocked something here. I think 15 years later, my feeling on that would be a lot different. And like my patience for working through all of the, you know, like, cause the thing with David Foster Wallace is like, he's just gonna like over explain everything. And when you're like 24, 25, and someone's like, I'm not just going to give you the clips, like I'm going to give you all the footnotes and they're all worth reading because there's insights everywhere. You're like, oh, cool. Finally, like someone to reach me in this
Yeah.
sort of
Give it to
manner.
me. Yeah, I want it.
Now, I guess like one thing, and I'd be curious your guys' thoughts on this, like as we're having this conversation, I almost feel like this is the equivalent of where, um, like a band like Radiohead is for me now versus when I was like in high school and college. Like when I was in high school and college, like albums like OK Computer, Kid A, Amnesiac were like the most groundbreaking shit I'd ever heard in my entire life. I'd never heard any band play music like that. And then I got on the internet, talked with people who liked that music, and they were like, "Well, have you heard this? Have you heard this? Have you gone down this rabbit hole?" And then like suddenly, you hear 1,000 albums that are splintering off from what a band like Radiohead does. And then the original thing uh, comes back as less dynamic because you found all these other pathways and all these
Mm.
other, ways of making music and making, writing that are inspired by like the general idea of where this book is coming from. But then the original thing is more nostalgic than like every time I put on OK Computer, I know that album note for note. It doesn't blow me away the way it did when I was 16 years old. It still really is impressive, but it's not like when you read this when you're younger and you're just like, no one's ever written me like this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. I was thinking about well, so first of all, I just want to tell you guys the other book I would have recommended by Tom Robbins is called Skinny Legs and All, and it's kind of like
Mm.
I mean, again, it's not really worth telling you what it's about because it's not really about much. But like part of the idea is that like there's an Arab and a Jew who like open a restaurant in New York together. They're like co-owners, and it's like across the street from the United Nations in New York. And it's just like stuff like that he would just do just to like see if he could like get away with it and see if he could like figure out a way to like keep these like really like, and there's like a lot of religion in that book. I mean, it's just like I feel like he was always just trying to figure out like how much he could provoke people and like still get away with it, you know? It's
Yeah.
just really interesting. Um, I'm the past like year I've reread The Great Gatsby and Catcher in the Rye both, and
Yeah.
they both still are like really amazing.
Yeah,
So I
they
think
they hold up.
there's
There's
like different there's like a line there between I think things that are I don't know what that line is. It's different for everybody obviously, but what is it that, would make you like think that you might feel differently now and then books that you read that still would be like amazing now,
Yeah.
Well, I think also it a little bit has to do with what Brian was saying about being of the time. Like I
Mm.
reread Gabriel Garcia Marquez, 100 Years of Solitude and Love in the Time of Cholera in the last 2 years, and both of them hold up like tremendously. And I think those books aren't rooted in a certain time in that sense of like, and I think if you are trying to be provocative politically, trying philosophically, existentially, like then you are going to be sort of rooted in the time because you're pushing at what provokes people in that time, right? Or that moment.
Yeah.
Or Tom Robbins was just a writer of his time. I'm not sure. I haven't read enough of him, but I would love to read more. And I think the way he plays with language really blew me away. But I do think there's something interesting about that. I read Vonnegut for the first time last year. I read Sirens of Titan and I loved it. It's so playful, but it's also more political kind of in a way, as opposed to interpersonal in that way. And I think that so there's less the playfulness is more epic and grander as opposed to between people, I think, which is easier to make it lasting in a way, if that makes sense. But I think that yeah, I'd be interested to read more Robbins and see if I felt like that. But I mean, there's no doubt that he has influenced writing so much. I mean, I think that his contribution to the American canon is massive. And I think that one thing that I've always want from writers and any artist is risk taking. And he's clearly a huge risk taker. And I don't know that I've read anything as kind of lush as his language is, except for like Marquez. Like his language is so dense, but also fun. And I think that's really, really hard to do. Usually when people write really dense, it's weighty and it bogs you down, but he's still light and funny, which is a huge accomplishment.
Yeah, I think like something just kind of back to the first question that you asked, Megan. I think part of the whatever he does, I'm not sure exactly how to describe it, but it feels like he like all of his writing gives a voice to like things that you're really like either struggling with or trying to figure out in
Yeah.
as you're like becoming an adult. And I think like giving like it can when someone gives you language or ideas or metaphors or just like funny kind of takes on things that you're already thinking about, it's just like it can really hit you, in a way that maybe in this day and age it's just I mean there's different books that hit us like that, you know.
Yeah, definitely.
I think what you're saying as well about like Gatsby and Catcher in the Rye, there's layers to these things of like books that will like I reread Gatsby a couple of years ago, and while it felt like it was perfectly designed to be that kind of first book you read in early high school to learn about great American authors, which I feel like is like that's like when you do it. Um, it also was clearly designed for and written for adults. So like you can read that book throughout your life and it can have different but just as monumental impacts. I mean, it's one of the maybe the greatest American novel. Um, I don't know. I feel like there's that, and then there's stuff that really hits you hard and may not later in life. And so like
Yeah.
there's always it's a hard thing because like as a writer, I think you're just trying to tell a story as best as you possibly can. And if you want to mess around with form or mess around with characters or expectations, that level of risk taking is going to be determinative of kind of your own overall abilities. And I think someone like this being a stepping stone for a lot of people as they're growing up, as they're going through a lot, I think is a really good thing. I do just want to read. I don't want to celebrate Goodreads reviewers all that much, but this is just kind of like this is the discrepancy of the Robbins experience. These are 2 reviews back to back, 8 years apart from each other. First one is a 1-star review. If you value the simple beauty of good prose, you will feel dirty after old Robbins spews gratuitous, barely cogent metaphors willy-nilly all over your literary face, line after nauseating line. Robbins clearly getting off on his own cleverness. It's just too bad he didn't stop to think about your needs. The next one, 5-star review. This book is by no small margin my favorite novel of all time. First off, Switters is the single greatest character to emerge from modern literature, pure and simple.
That's a bit much. It's a big statement. But
It's big.
yeah,
There's a bit of a
big
break here. I
capper.
mean, I think that to your point, like I would rather have a writer who is willing to write in as authentically their own voice and take
Yeah.
risks and me not totally get it than to not have it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Are there other books that we haven't mentioned? I know we mentioned a lot, or movies that you would recommend that are like Tom Robbins? Or if you want us to read more Tom Robbins, RJ, you can tell us that too.
I mean, I think Skinny Legs and All is probably my favorite book of his. I don't really know why I recommended this one, but that was a long time ago. It was before.
I feel like it might have been my fault. I think you said pick between these 2, and I picked this one because I like
great.
CIA stuff. So I feel like it was
Perfect.
my fault because
Okay, good.
yeah,
That makes
We
it way
can
easier.
it's my
take
fault.
the blame off of RJ's shoulders
Yeah.
after all
I
these
forgot
months.
after reading The Blind Assassin. I forgot why I recommended this one because I just like I was so mad for so long, and then I finally got
Oh my God,
got
how
out of
dare
it.
you? How dare you?
I wonder if there movies, like there's so many movies that could fall into this category that we're talking about. Like if you watched Fast
Yeah.
Times, like would that, like right now, is it
Stoner
still
films.
awesome?
It
Or
is.
was
I just
that like
watched it. I
okay.
just actually watched it with my daughter recently, and it totally hits. It's so fun. I mean, Sean
Okay.
Penn is like a genius, but yeah, I think anything like I was thinking like the Big Lebowski or any Coen Brothers films,
Big
any of
Lebowski still
those.
holds up. Big
Yeah, and they
Lebowski
all
still
hold
holds up.
up. I think
Yeah.
that there's any movie where you have like a rascally guy kind of like, I mean, Switters doesn't really get high, but it seems like he might want to.
I think that the 90s, like the Coen brothers world of these characters that make morally suspect choices in a almost lighthearted comedic way, but then they have real world, really awful results.
Yeah.
Parallels really nicely with something like this. And that is a very 90s culture. That feels a part of I mean, segueing into our next conversation here before we bring Mike Ayers on, but like the jam band scene is kind of rooted in that, playfulness. We're kind of joking. We're like we're serious about the music, but like we're really joking when we're like hanging out on stage with you guys, and like kind of absurdist, weird stuff can happen that it wouldn't happen at any other concert you go to, and may not make sense to the uninitiated. That happens a lot in this book, and that I imagine would happen in other Robbins books. I don't know why, but I keep thinking back to this is a totally different path, but like I have been wanting to rewatch Requiem for a Dream because it was this
Oh,
movie that like
so intense.
completely blew me away when I was like 15 years old. And the way he shoots it, like the way the music comes in, the like editing, obviously, yeah, the subject matter is very, very intense. But to me, what blew me away was like the technicality of it, which
Mm.
is another thing that blew me away from this book. Um, but I haven't rewatched it since like I was probably in college, and I'm really curious if I'm going to watch it and it's just going to come across very cringy, or if it's actually going to, because some Aronofsky stuff can feel a bit preachy at times. He can feel a bit like in your face, but I don't know.
I think the
I'm curious how
performances
that
in
would go.
that movie, like I've watched it, it was probably like 10 years ago, but the performances in that movie are so good that I think it holds up. But I like that comp. Yeah, I was thinking about this is a little strange, but I was thinking about One Battle After Another in the sense that kind of there's a guy who's, on the couch and then all of a sudden he has to kind of like save the world in a way. I thought that was kind of an interesting connection to Switter's.
Yeah, and Pynchon, another very absurdist,
Yeah.
subversive writer who is, think about the way that PTA made Inherent Vice. That is a movie that
Yeah, that's a good comp
doesn't
too,
doesn't
actually.
really
Yeah.
have a plot, and like, yeah,
Yeah.
you're following this kind of like dopey police officer who is, in love with someone who like their relationship is like non-committal but also like deeply involved with each other, and then like all these random side show scenes happen that tell a lot about authoritarianism versus outsiders, and like why can't someone just be an outsider, why can't someone just like live in like the gutter of society if they want to, like they're like that the connection between I'm forgetting Joaquin Phoenix's character's name, but him and Josh Brolin, that like back and forth. There's a lot of parallels there.
I like that. RJ, do you have any comps?
No, I think I did it all.
We did it. We did it all. Okay, great. Well, we should wrap up this episode. We're going to be back next week and we're talking about a movie. We're talking about a holiday travel movie. We're talking about a 1987 movie. I love 80s movies. Brian, tell us what we're talking about on Blockbuster Card next week.
We're gonna do Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. My favorite, I think the only true Thanksgiving movie. A movie I've probably seen more than any other. A movie that begs the question: why can't the War on Drugs do a Thanksgiving concert where they just cover the soundtrack to this album, or to this movie? I wrote a very long review on Letterboxd about this movie and connecting it to what was happening in American culture with Reaganism and where conservatism was and emerging populism, because it's all in there, and we're going to talk about it next week. I can't wait, and I hope that you guys all watch it.
Oh my God. I thought we were just watching like a John Candy comedy. So this is going to be great. I can't wait to get
There's
into it.
depth here.
I haven't seen it
There's
in a
no
really
such
long
thing
time.
as just a John Candy comedy. What are we talking about?
Because Brian, I watched those movies when I was like 10 years old. So to me, there was, it's
We
the
may be
layers
revisiting
thing.
this conversation from today then. Does this hold up?
Exactly.
We'll
I
see.
can't wait. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us and we'll see you next time. Until then, happy reading. Are we ending the stream, RJ? Or are we
we're just going.
Okay,
it's
cool.
all happening right now. It's all happening right now. We're just going to get straight into it.
Look at that.
We got people here. Brian already changed this. Everything's fine.
No, I did it. Just so
you did? Oh, wow. Jeez. So sorry, Brian, for giving you that credit. Okay. I'm going to add Mike and just get started. Hey, Mike.
Hi, how y'all doing?
Good.
Hey.
I'm gonna do a quick intro, and then we can just start talking right away. For those of you watching, thank you for sticking around. And we will start the show now. You get to see the behind the curtain view here. What's up, everybody? Welcome to HF Pod. This is RJ. I'm here with Brian and Megan. We have a special guest today, Mike Ayers, author of the book Sharon in the Groove. Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Good. How y'all doing?
Doing very well.
Great.
Thanks for coming on. Thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's awesome.
We are looking forward to chatting with you about the book, and thank you for sharing it with us and with everyone. I know you've been talking about this book a lot on some other Osiris pods and doing some other interviews. I'm glad you're out there, able to spread the word. It's cool.
Yeah, I mean, such a fun era. I can talk about this till, I don't know, the day is long. So anybody that wants to chit chat about the 90s and theorize about what's going on and, read and share some fun / insane stories from that era is a good thing.
For sure. Yeah. Well, let's just hop in. I think we have, a bunch of questions for you. Brian, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, Mike, really enjoyed sharing in the groove. It was so for me, I came into the jam band scene just after this ended. I got my first Fish tapes in the summer of 2001. So like the 90s have always been this kind of halo period where like I can't touch it, but I can read about it. I can listen to everything. The people that were there, they know. I'm curious, like just to jump into this, like how did you first get into jam bands? What was your life like within this scene in the 90s, and what's it been like over the last 20 years?
Yeah, look, this may come as a shock, but the Grateful Dead were my gateway.
There you go.
Yeah.
Early 90s, in high school, everybody started to find what was considered classic rock, your
Yeah.
Zeppelin, your Dead, your Pink Floyd, like everybody was obsessed with Pink Floyd, the Doors. You'd go to the mall store where they sold a bunch of like rock t-shirts, and the kids wear the Nirvana In Utero shirt all around these days.
Yeah.
That was the Doors back then, right?
Yep.
And and alternative music was coming up, Chili Peppers or what was billed as alternative Chili Peppers and Pearl Jam. So it was super eclectic, and all of us just started to listen to all those older bands, I guess, if you will, that a lot of the alt rock folks were citing as well in interviews. And the Dead just started to percolate pretty high. American Beauty was like on everybody's CD player, and Relics magazine started pointing the way towards not only Dead tapes. I literally remember I seriously, I was really cool to like 3 people, because I wrote to some random person in the back of Relics, like, please send me tapes. And they did. And so like I was like 3 other people in the school thought I was like the king.
A true
So
subculture,
that was
Yeah.
really it, like
Yeah.
I saw my first Dead show in '93 at the Cap Center, and it was just kind of, just saw as many as I could since then. I was in high school, so I couldn't see a ton. But when I first went to college in '94, Fish was coming up, and I'd bought Hoist based on an ad I saw in Relics, and I went to the Patriot Center in fall '94, like the day after their tour started at Lehigh. And it just, I don't know, they were just a band that they were like our age or like 10 years older.
Yeah.
They weren't like my parents' band, and
Sure.
everybody there felt the same thing. 2 or 3 weeks later, I was driving up to UVA to see them in Charlottesville. Like I just caught on immediately. And yeah, it was, I don't know, it was really, I don't know, uphill from there. Like just,
Up or down, whichever way you want to say, right?
yeah, whatever way you want to say, but it was pretty, I got pretty deep into it. And fall '95, I had this really amazing experience, where a friend of mine, her and I drove from Blacksburg, Virginia to Kalamazoo, Michigan without tickets on 10/27/95, like that Thursday night into Friday. And we got there super early. Like we got into the parking lot like at 11 a.m. They didn't know what was going on. It was like a hockey rink, minor league hockey rink. And I was like, oh yeah, we got tickets at will call. Like we're just, and they're like, oh, okay. We didn't have tickets at will call, but this woman approached us from the venue. We were just like hanging out at our car, and no one was around. And she was like, just talking to us about, who we are and why we were there. And she said, like, I work for the band, and every show we come out and we get fish kids that don't have tickets. And, if you want, you can come back and like wash dishes and scrub potatoes, and we'll give you.
That's amazing.
And so we were like, oh, yes, of course we'll do that. And we did do that. And, we were like 19, 20 years old, and, backstage that day, and it was fantastic. And that night, they would feed all the kids, right? And it was only not all the kids, like one or two. It wasn't like it was a free for all. It was like very, very select. But we were eating dinner, and the head cook, she was just like, are you guys going to Chicago? And we were like, well, we don't have tickets. It's been sold out for a long time, but we sure would love to go. And she was like, well, why don't you just come and cook? And so we did. And from there, we just like kind of had this amazing hookup where we could just go and like wash dishes as like a 21, 22-year-old kid and exchange for passes. So we did that for like the back half of the 90s. And so it's all to say that I got super deep into it, and was running around a lot, and washing and a lot of dishes and scrubbing a lot of potatoes.
I love that.
Cooking
That
for
like
fish. Who knew?
that sort of like communal engagement like really comes across in the book as you expand beyond fish, and as you look at a lot of the other artists, like that idea of we're all in this together, band and fans alike, as we're rising as this. So you have these really formative experiences. You've been writing for some time now. What made you want to write this book? What made you want to tell this story?
Well, I've been into this world for a while. Back in the 90s, at least where I was, everything was very segregated on your like musical identity. And, if you were like a fish kid, like a hacky sack kid, you kind of got made fun of by the Fugazi kids and the punk kids and all that sort of stuff. Like things were kind of separate. And, but in that world, like, if you knew about the musical prowess that these people had, not only like Fish, but just all the bands that are talking about, throughout that decade, you kind of knew, and you kind of like loved that they were a little bit of underdogs, right? Like they didn't get on MTV. A lot of them were shunned by radio. The record label, they signed to deals, but like some of them got dropped. Like it wasn't like super glorious. Some of them, Fish just went on to like keep releasing records on Elektra, but someone that worked there for like in A&R, she told me, she was just like, we kind of gave up on them. Meaning not in a bad way, but like we knew that they were going to do their thing, and 70,000 people were going to show up in the middle of New York to see them on a weekend with no openers. And we're just going to have to be okay with that, right? They're not going to sell 1 billion CDs, but they're good enough in our stable. So, to tell the story, it's really just, fast forward like 30 years, 25 years, I'd read like Meet Me in the Bathroom. I'd read Please Kill Me. Like there's some really great, Everybody Loves Our Town, like some really great oral histories about scenes. And I was just like, no one's done this. It would be great if I could do this. That would be, it would be amazing. There is a story to tell. There's a story to tell of like a DIY culture that rose to have 80,000 people show up in the middle of Florida on New Year's Eve. Like it's phenomenal. Like
Yeah.
no other bands or scenes were doing that. And there's ups and downs. There were like just so many stories with like record labels and clubs and drugs and all that sort of stuff that was unique to these people that were there. And they were very unique at what you were just saying. Like, I thought that should be told.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a reason you wanted to do it as an oral history as opposed to a traditional kind of biography or history book?
Yes. I have a theory, and y'all tell me what you think.
Okay.
I had a theory that people would like to hear it from the horse's mouth over me just writing through it. Especially when you're talking to like 150 people. There's so many like good voices, and everybody speaks in a certain way. And I was very like particular about leaving like everybody's dialect in, so you could
Mhm.
get a sense of the way people spoke. Like Billy Martin speaks very differently than Derek Trucks, and hopefully like that all that regional, like JB from Panic speaks very differently than Trey from Fish. Like they have this like dialect that I just thought people would love. They would love to hear it and experience it that way, versus treating it a little bit more like academic
Mm.
or just like biographical.
Sure.
I had read the Fish book, and it was fine. It's all good, but
The one from 09.
I'm much
Yeah,
more
yeah.
willing to hear or to read the Trey book.
Sure.
Well, I think it's
Yeah.
interesting, especially since you're kind of talking a lot about how place impacted these bands and how where they're from really impacted it and how the scene kind of grew out of each different area and region. And so that makes sense to me that you want to kind of preserve that and those voices from those regions.
Yeah, yeah. And it's just fascinating too, like how like as the decade progressed, they all kind of coalesced. And a little bit of like the island of the misfit toys situation. Right. Like they had like they were different, and they were different from what was quote unquote mainstream, and they kind of found each other and helped push each other along. Like some of the favorite parts that one of the favorite parts that I stumbled upon was just the mentorship that Fish provided to like Medeski, Martin and Wood and Strange Folk. I had no
Yeah.
idea that was a situation. I
Yeah.
had I knew that they were, honestly, I didn't know how much like Fish and MMW interacted when MMW was starting to really spike. And so I started I asked the guys about that, and they were just saying like how gracious they were about like just learning how to tour, and just like keeping books, and just all the things that you don't know unless someone tells you. And they were I think they were trustworthy.
Yeah.
They're super trustworthy. And Strange Folk as well, like they were really popping in the mid to late 90s. And so they had a lot of presence in Burlington, and Fish was still based out of there, so they were giving them all of the scoop on like what to do and what not to do. Like even like the manager of Mo, like getting the record contract, and he like he called several managers, Fish's manager, one of them, and like what do I do? Like they want
Yeah.
all of this stuff. And
Yeah.
so they could I just thought that was so cool and genuine that no one really. I personally didn't know that. I had no idea that
Yeah, me
that was
neither.
happening.
I think we think about Trey as like an elder statesman now, but it's amazing to see how much he was doing that in the past. I didn't know that about MMW either, and that was some of my favorite parts of the book was learning more about them and how, being this improvisational jazz group, but how much they learned and benefited from the jam band scene. It's really fun to see those connections and to see that and to see how much I think Fish also kind of was always looking for that mentorship from the Grateful Dead and never really got it. I think management got some of it, but I don't think they had that kind of, you know, bigger band showing them the way. And I think it's amazing that they did that for so many young bands.
Yeah, I think they wanted to pass on what they learned, and without having that. I mean, a lot of these acts, you know, they were just kind of thrown into the deep end in a lot of ways. Like, I just thought it was, phenomenal that Blues Traveler is playing a really, really crappy club in New York, and then at the beginning of like 90 or 89, and then by the end of the year, they're opening for the Almonds or somebody during New Year's out west. Like the learning curve is steep, being a 20 something kid, just kind of, you know, figuring it out as you're going along. It's just not easy. So
Yeah.
yeah, I thought it was very, I don't know, it was just amazing that they did that with like no expectations. Like,
Yeah.
nothing, you don't like, there's nothing in return.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that like, because there are a couple cautionary tales in here. I think
Mm.
specifically like God Street Wine and Strange Folk, it felt like the growth that they had was not sustainable to who the band was at the time, and it led to challenges within the band. Some of them breaking up. You also get into, I mean, Moe's record label situation is so fascinating. They made so much money on all this hype essentially. And you could kind of see, you could hear in the band that they were like, I guess like we got to sign on the dotted line, like we got to move our career forward. And like, thankfully for a band like Moe, they were able to figure out that is not for us. How do we get out and back to where we want to be? And that feels like it was a very um, calculated, not in like a negative way, but like if we're going to survive as a band, like this is not the pathway forward for us. Um, did any of those types of stories of like growth and success or challenges that they were dealing with based on being on the road or record label, misunderstanding of who these bands are, did any of those hit differently 30 years later?
Um, yeah, like the case with Mo was super interesting. I mean, you couldn't like go to a jam show in '96 without hearing the word Mo,
Yeah.
right? It was just like it was
They
pretty
talk about their logo that like you could see a t-shirt on
the
either sides of
logo,
like
yeah,
MSG type of thing. Yeah.
yeah, it's pretty ubiquitous. And Al told me this, like one of like the best stories is that he he remembers like meeting the president of Sony, and she's like, I don't really get you. I don't really get you. I don't really get you or your band, but Michael likes you, so I guess that's good. That's good enough. I trust him.
Yeah.
And he was like, I remember walking out there being like so high on life, like, I signed with a record label and I have so much creative freedom and creative control, and this is going to be great. And then he was like, and then 3 months later, I was telling the story to somebody, and she was like, you don't think it's a massive problem that the head of the label hates your band? And he was like, oh, yeah, that's not good. So it's like, yeah, I thought Mo was going to be huge, to be honest. Like, I thought they were primed to be basically the next Primus. They
Mm.
were very like bassy, like very kind of like Primus was jokey. like and they kind of they were pretty MTV for a while, you know, kind of lumped in with like the alt rocks
Mhm.
of the world. But you know, they really didn't. And there was just this, you know, God Street and Strange Folk to a degree, and Mo, you know, there was just a lot of like, oh, they have a crowd. Oh, they sold out tickets. They don't have a record label. Let's just snap them up. We'll figure it out. And so there's a lot of like throwing spaghetti against the wall to like figure out, and not only this genre, but a lot of genres. And and then, you know, you get dropped, and then you're kind of like, well, what are you supposed to do? You know, luckily for Mo, that they really, I think, they just knew how to play live from day one. They,
Sure.
I think, really smartly said yes to that Further Festival after Jerry died, like the 97 Further Festival, where they were like playing like the 2 p.m. or 1 p.m. slot. But, you know, they just told me that that was massive for them, because
Mhm.
when Further was done, like the tours got really, really big. So it just got their name, you know, they got their name out there to where the audience was, if it wasn't going to be at radio. And so they kept that trajectory. um you know, by like when Fish was wrapping things up at the end of 2001, or end of 2000, and taking a little bit of a break, like they were like, them and String Cheese were like, they were
Oh, they
going.
said it. Yeah.
Yeah, like they were going. You know, Mo played 2 nights at Radio City Music Hall in 2006.
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah.
like they it's amazing to me that they, you know, had that experience with the record label that didn't work out for them. Because, you know, I'm sure when you're, you know, you're a kid musician, and, you know, a major label wants to give you hundreds of thousands of, like that is like,
It's making it.
it's making it, especially in the 90s, like you've made it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So
Do you think labels and management have changed in their perspective? Like we think about the young jam band scene that's so big right now with bands like Eggy and Goose and Doggins and Pile. And do you think labels have now decided like we're going to allow these bands to just build their live performances and we're not going to expect radio play and we're still going to sign them, we're still going to back them? Do you think that they've learned anything from the experience?
I mean, I don't think they do. I mean, Goose is still independent. I'm sure they've turned down things at this point. Dogs, I don't think has a label. You know, the bluegrassy leaning ones still, you know, they
Yeah,
typically sign to like, you know, Rounder or some 30 Tigers imprint. Uh, and but those labels, I think, know the value of building up, you
yeah,
know, a live audience, and, you know, staying with somebody for the long haul. Like,
Yeah.
I guess, like, you know, Jason Isbell is, you know, I was listening to Southeastern earlier today, and
Mm.
he's still on that same thing, but he's done really, really well. And just,
hmm,
that's like a 10, 11, 12-year climb that
yeah,
he has just really put in the live work. So, you know, I think I would surmise that, you know, the major labels that were signing jam bands back in the 90s, um, have given up, I would guess. You know, they probably
yeah.
don't like the fact that Goose sells out, or, you know, packs MSG to the gills. But, you know, they're, at the end of the day, like, I don't know, they have bean counters that are doing the math.
Yeah.
And
Well, and I guess the fans don't I don't know if the fans really want them to be on big labels either. Like, I think of all the heat that Goose has gotten for seeming, like, overmanaged or, like, they're, from the jam band Illuminati, like, Shapiro plants, like, it's this joke, but I think the fans really want to see that DIY approach. They really want this authenticity
Of
that
course.
if they feel like is at all compromised, it it bothers them, which is interesting, I think.
It is, yeah. The jamband Illuminati.
It's like one of my favorite things. It's so stupid and
I mean,
funny.
it is interesting how much things have changed, because when you think about when this book ends, almost like with Big Cypress, and kind of it ends in that way of like, well, then like the 2000s, everything, like what happens then? And like you could write essentially like 3 or 4 different oral histories of this, tracking the history of the jam band scene since the 90s. Because in the 2000s, you get Bonnaroo, which is basically, here we're going to create a Glastonbury for jam band fans, which is now 20 years later become just a mega festival that I don't even think there's jam bands on the lineup anymore. But that then you had a bunch of, you get early in the history of Humphreys McGee and of the Disco Biscuits in the late 90s, 2 bands that would grow pretty substantially throughout the 2000s. What Meg's mentioning with like Goose and Fish and Eggy and Billy Strings, a lot of these bands don't seem to need what bands in the 90s thought they needed, because as you were emerging in the 90s, there was a
Yeah.
perception of like, well, if you can sell out an arena, you can sell, you can go 3 times platinum, and like now you're making money for the record label and for yourself, and you can get on MTV. But there was this question that nobody was really asking themselves when they were signing these bands of like, is this just niche entertainment? Like, is this like for a small number of people who are going to throw everything into this scene, or is this for everyone? And it feels like there's a little bit more comfort now, but I'm curious, do you see it like the evolution over the last 20 years as being more in favor of these bands, or do you think that there are still limitations for them at this point in time, the way that there were in the 90s for some of them?
I think it feels like they have, by not being beholden to a record or a record cycle, or like this single be at the radio and all that. So not being beholden to that, I think that's a really great thing, that the acts of the 90s certainly had to think about. They had people asking them about. And God Street was super interesting, because I think one of them told me, like, we just didn't know, like, they had this like two-headed frontman scenario
Sure.
where it was like Aaron and Lowe, and they didn't really know whether they wanted to be a pop rock radio act or
Yeah.
a jam band, like, festival, whatever act, that a live act. And that essentially screwed them, because the audience themselves didn't know what to think either. When you
Yeah.
have like these 2 different factions that emerged at your show, they didn't really know. Spin Doctors was the same way, they essentially had to play the MTV act after they broke on that. So I would think that the acts now, they don't have to stress about that sort of stuff as much as, look, I'm not saying it's not difficult, like,
Sure. Yeah.
Of course, yeah. It's a different expectation though, right? I think in the 90s it was almost like a curse if you had a hit. Like I always wonder the alternate world where Fish had
right.
like a couple singles that hit, like what would they have become, and did they avoid like Spin Doctors and a little bit of Blues Traveler Fate too by not having that? I think Dave Matthews was able to push through that despite it, and maybe Fish would have anyway, but I always wonder it was almost like a curse.
They did. No, yeah,
Yeah.
it completely was. They did like push at that. And that same woman that worked in A&R, I remember her telling me about how like it was like pulling teeth to get them to do any sort of promo or press. They just were not interested in it.
Oh, yeah, and if they did it, they'd sabotage it, right? They'd wear, like, tutus and be in, like, a swimming pool, like, looking ridiculous. Like, they really, like yeah, they made it hard, but I think that was kind of their saving grace. in a lot of
And
ways. I don't know if you think there's something else that was different about Fish that kind of made them, I mean, there's so many things that made them successful, but made them kind of move past and have that longevity that so many of these other bands didn't.
yeah, I mean, I, they're outsiders, right? They're super smart. Y'all were just talking about Tom Robbins. These are like the kids that, read Tom Robbins in the back of the room
Totally. They're
and
nerds.
laugh and those sorts of things. And, just like there was a lot of surrealism in his work, like that, there's, they created lore, they created like desire, they created community, they created all of these things that these other bands were doing some of it, but they weren't leaning into it so hard.
Mm.
And, it was like if you were a Fish obsessive and still are a Fish, it's just like, it's like D&D, it's just like, it's this, if it's the ultimate, if mentality.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
feeling, like when you create that feeling for people and then can replicate it in different ways every single night, like you have a recipe for just a healthy obsession. It's great.
Yeah.
Mike, I just wanted to ask about like some Fish stuff. I feel like over the past 5 years or so, Trey has become like so much more of an open book. Like it was so hard to get stories out of Trey, and then like between the Sirius XM stuff and
Yeah.
all these profiles, and now he's just like he'll basically just talk to anyone and tell them lots of stories, which is awesome. But I feel like so much of the stuff we now know through, very recent history. Is there anything like really surprising that you learned about Fish specifically that like our listeners might be interested in? Like something you didn't know at all going in, or something that really surprised you?
Yeah. I loved when he was telling me about feeling like he had imposter syndrome when he walked on stage in like the late 90s. I had never heard him really say that. And I remember seeing the shows a lot. And that never would have occurred to me.
No,
Um,
definitely not.
Yeah. No.
Not only is he good at what he does, but like he just, it felt confident. Like it didn't feel unconfident, but I guess when the microscope from a community and in everything is really starting to like ramp up as it was in the late 90s, I guess you could feel that. Like, he kind of talked about it too in the like Jerry dying, like really changed things, I think, and that in ways that he seemingly doesn't still understand. Like, just because for him, like they were not playing the same type of music, so it
Yeah.
doesn't make sense to
Yeah.
equate. It
Yeah.
doesn't make sense. Like this is not an apples to apples situation. And so it's just like weird. It's just like MMW being like, we don't listen to Grateful Dead, never have. Why are all these people showing up in Grateful Dead shirts? Like there's these moments that I just thought were really like really beautiful. I really wanted to talk to him about Billy Breathes. I just remember that record being a very seminal record for like the fan
Amazing.
community. Like I remember buying it the day it came out,
Yeah.
and
Same.
Yeah,
and I
same.
just remember everybody loving
Yeah.
it.
Well, it's
And
maybe the best jam band studio album.
it's
And it's got to
fantastic.
be up there. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just so like, but that stuff is so fascinating to me because that released in the fall 96, right? Like October 96. And the big story of 96 is Clifford Ball. It has nothing to do with Billy Breeze, the studio record. but it's a phenomenal record. And they put a
But,
lot
that's what
of,
we didn't care about then.
we didn't
We
care
didn't
about it.
like that. We didn't like that. Like, we would secretly listen to it, but, like, we didn't like it. Like, Rift is, like, the
Yeah,
reason I started listening to Fish, but I wouldn't admit that that's what I liked because that's
right.
not,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
like, it wasn't
So
cool.
they put so much effort into those things, and yeah, so I was excited to really talk to him about that, and like listen, he relayed, which is in the book, about how he essentially wrote the lyrics to Billy Breathes with his daughter in his hands, like in real time, like it's literally a transcription of what he's seeing like outside. It's just like, you got a lot of like jam bands, like got a lot of flack then. They probably still get a lot of flack now, especially around lyrics. But like, a song like that, or Swept Away, like it's just uh there's these very beautiful, gorgeous moments that got buried, it felt like. So
Yeah.
it was great to talk
Yeah.
about those moments.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah,
That's
you're
really
right.
cool.
You're right, RJ. Like, he has talked a lot more in the last couple years, and um, I think there. I don't know all the prescriptions around sobriety, but like there just seems to be like a clarity that exudes from him on stage, and like uh, just like a love of life that probably exists now that maybe too stressful back then. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a
It
lot.
it was, however, one of the cool things about learning about him, mentoring strange folk and the fish community in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
or the fish management, because it did feel like, I remember when you could very clearly see him taking Goose under his wing.
Yeah.
No pun intended. And guiding them along, and that tour that his solo band did with them was clearly like, hey, this is how we operate in an arena. This is what our days are structured like. And those guys have talked about what that experience was like for them and how formative it was. It was cool to see that, like, there was still some of that in him in the late 90s, even as things were getting so intense in the fish world. He wasn't talking to the press as much about that sort of stuff, but like him being in a position where he was kind of seen as he had cracked some sort of a code and should provide some advice and insight into the next group coming up was I don't know, just great to learn about him at that point in time.
Yeah, yeah. It just, I don't know. Like, it's just, a very giving mentality. And yeah, you
Yeah.
fast forward to like 30, 25, 30 more years, and he's doing the same for Goose, and doing it for Billy, and you know with decades behind you, you could probably start to really see like how things are progressing, and you know hindsight being 2020, like what would I want to know. And um but yeah, but not only was he doing it, that not only was he doing it um behind the scenes, but like with Goose, like sitting in every night, like that's just like a musical world that he treated people to, that I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, so generous. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm similar age to you, and I always was confused why the Grateful Dead would never acknowledge Fish. And I felt like it was kind of sad that Jerry passed before like they ever had an acknowledgement of like who Fish was. And maybe that was just like a chip on my shoulder about I grew up kind of the same way you did, loving the Dead and then getting into Fish. And it kind of felt like you pass the torch in a way. And like we joke about now, there's so many torch passing things now, but in a way that is kind of what you should do. And I always was sad that didn't happen. And I think Trey's done just a beautiful job of ensuring that he's done that for other bands. And I think you're right. I think it speaks to his generosity.
Yeah,
Spirit.
I wanted to do a chapter. I just didn't have enough material for it, but I wanted to do one on the Fill and Friends shows at the Warfield in '99.
Mm.
did.
Yeah, that would have been
That
cool.
was, I remember being this like crazy moment where
That was the first time when it felt like,
that's what it
yeah,
was.
yeah,
Yeah, it
yeah. I
was
was
this
waiting
like,
for that for so long.
it was like this coming together and acknowledgement that from both sides that I just
Yeah,
thought was, it was very unique, and I just couldn't get it together. But I just thought like that was just like a really big moment. And then of course Trey did the Dead reunion 10 years ago, and
yeah.
that film.
That was finally the acknowledgement that I felt we all needed. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, there is something in there of like, because everything I've ever read about the Dead organization in the late '90s was there was a lot in flux, and who is going to carry the torch on for the
Yeah.
band, and what happens with, they figured it out from like a merchandising and from a CD release and box set standpoint, and Dead and Co. continuing to exist, for so long that we almost forget, looking back now, that there was this period in time of like, well, what is going to happen with the Grateful Dead, and has that just gone away, and is now, this young generation has to bring things forward. There's almost like a part two of your book, starting with Phil and Friends and going almost to like Fare Thee Well. And because that there's another shift around 2015 where these big eventizing, the Mexico shows and kind of
Yeah.
reemergence of festivals, and these bands playing multi-band tours as like even younger jam bands now are rising. I don't know, there's something tied together there with that Phil and Friends show and what would happen over the next 15 years.
Yeah, it was this like, I don't know, meeting of the minds. I don't know what to tell you.
Mhm.
I don't know how to describe it, but it was, yeah, there's just like this
Like when Shock Does Torture and Prince Caspian get like the Dead feel to them, there's like a, Wolfman's Brother, there's almost like a sense of like, why are we segregating ourselves into different fan bases? Like all this music carries over in a really fascinating way.
Hmm.
Yeah, that is a great point. And then, like a couple years later, the Bonnaroo, really set it off by bringing a lot together. And there's some ebbs and flows over the 10 years prior to that, but I feel like the last 8 to 10 years has been pretty healthy. And you start to, and you go to shows now, and there's people from, it's certainly spanning generations that you used to see at Dead shows, but you wouldn't really see at Fish shows. Definitely wouldn't see him at Mo shows. But like Billy the other night it was all over the map. And I talked to a guy the next day. He was probably 17 years old, and he was like deep into Billy. Like, Fish who? Like what? And like I love that. I love that, like
Yeah.
Gizzard is like doing that.
Yeah,
Like you
absolutely.
have all these, now you have these artists that are like fueling the obsession that Fish and MMW did, back in the 90s. And they're doing it in new, unique ways. So there's the threads. There's certainly threads that started back then, but it's kind of evolved now, and it's pretty wild to see. And I love the fact that it's bucking so many like traditional like music industry norms, and
Yeah.
they're fine with it. They're fine with it. Like King Gizzard, like just saying bootleg any of my shows, put them on vinyl, just send us a copy. Like, that's what an evolution of like the live tape,
But that's also like it's punk, right? And you talk about this in the book too, that there are elements of this scene that are punk. They're anti-establishment in a way that is, it's that's lasting always.
It is lasting.
Hmm.
And people, especially in this scene, they appreciate it. Like, we appreciate those things. Like, we
Yeah.
appreciate, you know, people, standing up for, what's right, or their art, or whatever, whatever have you, because because they believe in it. Now it helps that they're really good.
They have to be good. I mean, the
That
fan base won't take it.
Oh,
We're very critical fan base.
yes.
well, that's one of the interesting things about this is like there's no real story in here of someone who got famous overnight and nobody really knew why they got famous and then like they couldn't deliver on the next album. Like that's not
Yeah,
really the
yeah.
challenges or the next like tour. That's not really the challenges any of these bands are because they all talk about it that like the bare minimum requirement for any of these bands to exist was they had to play live really well. And so
That's it.
like you get that as kind of like the entry point, you're going to suddenly get an amalgamation of all these different sounds and all these different ideas. One thing I kept coming back to, and we've been kind of dancing around this, is like it felt like all these bands in the '90s were bands that would have thrived in the music rules of the 2000s, but they just happened to
Mm.
emerge in the '90s, and maybe culturally things were a little bit different. You know, there was more money that record labels were able to throw out, so like certain bands were able to jump to that next level. But it does feel like by the time Fish definitely when they come back in '09, but even in the 2.0 era when they launched the Live Fish website and this revolutionary thing where the next morning every single one of these concerts is available live. Now they're available within 5 minutes of a show ending. But by 2010, they're webcasting their shows, which is going to introduce a whole new, you know, revenue stream for these bands, plus a whole new way for them to connect with, you know, maybe middle-aged people that don't want to go to every concert, but they want to watch them. So now they can stream them in their
You,
house and
Brian, you.
everything. Me potentially, but like it feels in a lot of ways like a lot of these bands. You know, you think about some of them who didn't quite make it past the '90s. If they could have just hung on for like 3, 4 more years, the iPod
Mm.
comes around, Napster comes around, rules around, you know, music change dramatically. There's a huge cultural outpouring of releasing live release box sets thanks to the Dick's Pick series and the Live Fish series. It just seems like so much was about to change for some of them that some just couldn't hang on to.
I completely agree. Like all of those things that you're talking, I'm like, yes, yes, yes. Like these are like the amount that they have done, just like the notion of the webcast, right?
Mm,
Like it's just fascinating to me that now Goose and Billy and like a lot of acts do it, and Fish
yeah.
Aggie. I mean,
certainly paved the way for this. But there's other fan bases that are just as obsessive, and it's crazy to me that like Taylor Swift is not monetizing her shows through
totally.
webcasting because they like globally fans would watch every single
And they
thing.
would
It's
still go to
so
the shows like
yeah,
Of
this
it's
course
so
they
they're
would.
not going to
right? Yeah.
shows like
I have a friend who's like a massive Radiohead fan, and they're doing their first tour in 7 years. And
Yes.
why wouldn't they stream these shows? These tickets are impossible to get. She was explaining to me how hard it was to get the tickets and how it was to line up. She wants to go to more than one. And like they're not live streaming. That's they could make so much money. It's weird.
It's
Nobody
wild
wants
to
to
me.
learn stuff from jam bands though. Like they don't want it. They don't want our information. They think we're like, I don't know. It's very devalued. That's one reason why I really appreciated you writing the book, because I really believe in the archive, and we have to have, this somewhere. It is a legitimate scene, and I think it's important to have that down. But yeah, why aren't these bands doing it? It's very weird.
It's crazy to me. It's really leaving money on the table, and
Which
uh,
Taylor Swift doesn't do, so that's weird,
it
for
is
sure.
weird. Like I don't understand it at all. But I'm glad our bands do it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
me too.
Because then it's just an everyday conversation, whatever appears on Nugs, whatever new shows you discover. Um, I've got 2 questions here for you because I have to be speaking of middle age, not going to concerts. I have to go pick up my kids here in a minute. One question, probably my favorite sections of the whole book were the Medeski, Martin, and Wood stuff. That was a huge band for me at
Same.
that point in time, and one of the best concerts I've ever seen was their Bonnaroo 2003 all night, like midnight to 5 a.m. show. Just blew my mind. What was it like for you talking with those guys? Like, where do you see like what kind of like fascinated you about them during that period and within that scene? Because they are just like slightly removed, but still a part of it, but slightly removed. They're such an interesting case within there.
Do you think they're slightly removed?
I mean, I think just the focus on jazz. i- there's a less of like the whimsy you get in
They're
some of the
cooler than
other
us.
bands. Yeah, there's like a New York cool, more
I think,
like
yeah.
indie bookish type of side to them that I would not compare with other, or I would not say that for a lot of other bands.
Yeah. I loved them. And I remember in, it was, they opened for Fish in 95, like 3 gigs.
Yeah.
And that show that MMW played at Emo's on 10/14/95 that Trey sat in on,
Mhm.
like, Rec Music Fish was like ablaze the next morning about everybody had the tapes within like
Mhm.
Yeah.
2 weeks, like
Yeah.
crystal soundboards. And it was like your duty as a card carrying jam band fan to tell everybody you could and dub them that tape. And so by spring 96, like they were doing another tour and I was all about it. And it became really hard, like immediately, like pretty hard to get into the gigs. Like they were like catching fire. um I just thought they were so creative. Like they were just doing
Mhm.
things that were like I'd never heard before. I'd never seen 3 people do what they did on stage. uh and and then they just flipped it on a head. And take it for granted these days, but like throwing a DJ into the mix as well was like really unheard of back then.
So, yeah.
And so they were blending elements that you just really couldn't, I don't know, I just didn't hear anywhere. And so I thought like, and I wasn't like, I just didn't feel like I was abnormal, in terms of my fandom. So I really remembered them being like a very poignant part of the story. Like you would go to a Fish parking lot, and it was super common to hear Medeski bootlegs playing. Um, and uh, and so I love them. And I remember Shackman being like this record that the CD that everybody had. And then when they jumped to Blue Note, like that was like a really big, I think, moment, because Blue Note in the 90s was like this, it was kind of goofy. Like it wasn't doing cool avant-garde New York stuff.
Sure.
And so they were just constantly pushing the envelope forward. So whereas they may have been confused about the fandom and they may have never listened to the Grateful Dead, they were still doing things that the fandom really appreciated, and that was just a massive appreciation for improv and for pushing the ball forward in the studio, on stage. Um, I think they're kind of a case of like going pretty hard, pretty fast. Like they had to create an infrastructure pretty quickly because of they had just a pretty fast rise. I mean, they certainly told me by the end of the decade, like even though they kept playing on, they're pretty burnt.
Mm,
Um,
Yeah, you get
that
that from
makes
a lot
sense.
of these bands. That's
yeah.
definitely a crossover.
Mhm.
One last question for you from my end. One band that has always stuck with me from this era, from the later part of this era, is The Slip, which I think got like 1 or 2 quotes in there. Um, but I'm curious, like, were there any other bands from that period in time that you were like, man, I would have killed to have space for X band that I didn't necessarily get to tell their whole story? Was there anyone that came up like that?
Yeah, there was like some bands that were from the Northeast that like seemed to play like this corridor of like the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast. And And they were getting popular, like Ominous Sea Pods and Deep Banana Blackout and the Slip. I remember uh, this band, Jacob Fred Jazz Odyssey,
Yeah.
um, Joe Russo's early band, I think Fat Mama. There were some bands. I kind of had a criteria where the criteria was you had to be playing nationally. You had to have like a national footprint, and you had to have a major label because I wanted to tell that story and those juxtapositions. There was only one band that was the exception, and that was String Cheese Incident. But they were offered a bunch of major labels,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they turned them down, which I
And they
thought
had the
was
national following. Yeah.
they had and I thought that was cool. Like
Yeah.
they learned
Yeah.
like that might not be the best. Like
Yeah. They
why?
saw like the Mo path and they were like, that's not for us. Like we're gonna
Yeah,
stay weird.
That's hard to do too. I mean, people
Yeah.
offer you money to make music. Like that's hard to do.
it's hard to do, but they I guess had the realization like they could just look inward and be like, we're not going to deliver what they want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what we're doing is resonating. Why don't we just try to take that to a different level, like a bigger level? And they did. So I thought that was, but that was like the one exception.
Yeah. That
Um,
makes sense. I don't think you can tell the story without them. And so like that makes a lot of sense.
yeah.
Nice. Well, I'm gonna jump. I know you guys got a couple more things to chat through, but thank you so much for the book, man, and I really appreciate your time. And anyone out there who hasn't read "Sharon in the Groove" by Mike Ayers, please go get a copy. There's a ton of great information, and I've told you guys on the show. I'll tell you, Mike, I was spinning old Panic tapes. I was spinning Mo shows. I was going down a deep end for like a 2-week period in time. It was a ton of fun. So thank you.
Amazing. Yeah, it does not get old.
No, it does not.
Well, it's kind of perfect with the new Fish release. I don't know if you've listened to it, but they just released 12/28 90 from the Marquee. And I listened to it this weekend. It was just so fun hearing that after reading your book and just thinking about where the band was then in 1990 and realizing how much was going on that we didn't know about behind the scenes. So it was awesome.
I know. I'm pretty sure that is the show that the woman that signed them to Elektra, Sue Drew. That's the show that she saw them at and was
Is
like,
it really?
I would bet a lot of money that it was. And she was like, what is this? What is happening here? This is like the devotion, even back then in
Yeah.
1990, that I'm seeing. I don't see this, and I need to get a meeting with them. And like some odd weeks later, she went up to Burlington and like went out and took him out to dinner and was, you know, in the saving grace, I think, or not saving grace, well, for her, but the reason why she chose them is because she had signed They Might Be Giants, and they thought They
Right.
Might Be Giants were weird. And they were like, oh, okay, well, they have the Pixies, They Might Be Giants, and she brought them They Might Be Giants. Okay, that's it. Like, okay, we're listening. Like that sort of thing. Like if they were if the person was just some run of the mill like suit that didn't have that pedigree, it could have been totally different.
Yeah, that's amazing too. And listening to that show, it's like pure fish in a way, it's that fish that is so tight, but still really weird and loose in so many ways. And it's so authentic. And that's great. I didn't know that that's that show. And that's
Mhm.
awesome. It's fun to listen to after reading your book and thinking so much about all the stuff that was going on behind the scenes. I loved hearing about New York. I live in New York now, and I just loved getting this like inside view into like Nightingales in the Wetlands and the Marquee and all these old venues and thinking about when Fish was playing there. It's so fun to imagine that because the first time I ever saw Fish play in New York City, it was at MSG, and it was in 97, but still it was a big time.
Oh
And
yeah,
fun.
it was big time. And yeah, there's just like, it's interesting. Like the city, New York, all these cities here, Athens, New York, Burlington, Boulder, like they all have these places that pretty much no longer exist anymore. But they were so integral to these young acts and just giving them a home and uh, just letting them play and develop a craft, right? Like these weren't studios where they're like twisting knobs and like figuring out like
Yeah,
doing
no.
the overdubs. Like this was just like they just had like these home bases that just let them play so much, and then they got good at it.
Well, I
And
love that too. So much of it is in selfish interest of these clubs, right? They just wanted somebody to play on Monday night, and so they're like, "Yeah, you can come and play every Monday night,"
oh,
and I think it's just so great when those two things align. When they're, and there's just someone hungry enough to do it, and a bar that's like, whatever, we don't care what you do if you bring people in. It was
correct.
cool to see how that happened in so many different cities and how that aligned for so many of these bands, and I hope that that still exists for young bands now, and that they get to play in these bars that just want people to play on Monday nights, and I hope that leads to them having a 30-year career in music. It's awesome to think about.
Yeah, I hope so. The Stone Pony in Asbury still feels like it's doing that. There's still like some there will be places for sure. They just might have a different name, and a lot of the like indie like local festivals like give you know they're very good about giving local acts like spots on the bill, and one of the ways that I discover music now is I look at like the festival posters, and at the bottom
Mhm.
there's acts that I don't know, and I just go and listen to them on Bandcamp and check them out. And usually if you're you know on the bill with Goose and J-Rad, I might like you. It's probably a good
There's a good
chance.
chance, yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting, I've always wondered about that, about the indie scene and why some of these indie labels haven't been interested in jam bands. I don't know if it's dilutes their brand, or they don't want something that's, off label the way that jam bands tend to be. But I do think it's interesting that they've never jumped on, like, we talk now about how we were talking about how the bigger labels don't want jam bands, but I've always been interested in why indie labels don't either.
I don't. Yeah, that's a good question, and it was very, very interesting to me that Kill Rock Stars signed Michaela Davis, and
Yeah.
it was just like it felt like so out of the blue, and I was like, "Huh, that's really interesting." And it's a great record, but you don't see it, and maybe it's like an aesthetic thing that they're very
Yeah.
careful about. I'm not quite sure. I do know that Goose does distribution through Secretly Canadian for all
Mm.
their vinyl, so um, they at least are using them to like support them to like at least get their stuff out there from a company that knows how to do that.
I mean, if anybody's gonna make the indie crossover, it's Goose, so we'll hold our breath for that for sure.
I know. I know they might have like a kid A in them.
Yeah, they I just got to talk to Cotter this weekend for an interview I'll put out, and we were talking about their use of the studio and how much they like the studio, and Rick loves the studio, so it's interesting to see what they might be able to do. But I've been surprised that indie labels aren't interested in them, and maybe they are, and we just don't know, and they haven't signed with them. But
They might
yeah.
be, and they just want to retain control themselves. I don't know. It is very fascinating to see how it's going to play out.
Well, when you write the next oral history, I'm sure Goose will be a part of that. So it was great. Thanks so much for sending us the book and for coming on the show. It was really enlightening. I learned a lot I didn't know. I was pretty myopic in the 90s, and it was really fun to kind of open up my world and see what the other bands were up to. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. This was awesome.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, come back anytime and write another book for us so we can find out what happened from 99 to 25. Brinkman's really good about giving people things to do, so he just gave you that assignment, and we'll be waiting for you.
No, I believe he just said like, you have 4 books left after 1 month. I was like, okay.
Slow down here. Yeah. Well, he's
Yeah,
done
no, I
okay.
appreciate it. This was super fun.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. And if you have not read Sharon in the Groove, everybody out there, you got to read it. Mike Ayers, like person from our scene, and got to support him. And the book is awesome. It's a great holiday gift. So everybody should check that out. And we'll see you next week. We'll be back. I think we're doing a possum. My dog's having things to say, but we're going to do our possum Mount Rushmore next week. So we'll be back picking our top 4 versions of possum. I still have about 20 to listen to. So it's a lot of hours of possum to listen to, but sacrificing for the podcast. And I'm excited to see that. So we'll see everybody next week for that. And thanks again, Mike.
Thank you.